Welcome back, boxing fans. So I was just at Family Mart doing a PPT for work when I saw that, of course, John Boxing came out with a video saying Terrence Crawford continues to be disrespected. It's funny that a guy like him always sees the black fighters but disrespected. Yet all the videos he's made, literally since Floyd Mayweather retired, to try to discredit any non-black fighter that was getting some kind of shine as a potential pound for pound number one fighter, whether we're talking about Lomachenko, Canelo Alvarez, whether we're talking about Roman Gonzalez, whether we're talking about Inoue now, it don't matter. Guys like John consistently tried to find ways to discredit these non-black fighters to do what? Elevate a black fighter, whether it was Terrence Crawford, whether it was Andre Ward. And when we have these conversations, they always come out saying, well, I have my preference. This is my opinion. It's ironic, though, when somebody else has a different opinion or a different preference, all of a sudden that's disrespectful, right? Like literally, Lomachenko just won a big fight this weekend against George Kambosos. And John's literally came out with 3 videos disrespecting and trying to downplay the victory that Lomachenko ended up getting. Right? Because this is consistently what guys like him do. They try to find ways to discredit non-black fighters that are getting a lot of attention for doing great things in boxing. He literally came out and praised Bud Crawford for being a two-weight undisputed champion. Yet he ignores the fact that Inoue is the only other fighter in boxing who's accomplished that. And this weekend, Usyk may go on to equal that, which is why historically I've been saying that when we talk about pound for pound number one, you got to talk about Bud, Inoue, and Usyk being the 3 horses that lead that race. And depending on what they're doing in the ring, who's fighting, who's being active, that's going to change the position. Inoue just came from a fantastic performance against Luis Neri. So he's pound for pound number one now because Bud Crawford literally has been inactive since fighting Errol Spence over a year ago. Inoue's fought 3 times. Right? These things matter. How do you have somebody ranked pound for pound number one that's not fighting? That's why things like BoxRec, if you're inactive, they take your name out of their rankings. That's what they do, right? This is just normal. I use this reference consistently for Champions League football, right? Teams adjust the number one position in the rankings for Champions League football week by week, depending on the games they just played, won or lost, and the other top teams and how they performed, right? Nothing is long term when we talk about pound for pound. He's now trying to talk about it's who you fought. It's who you fought. And he's using Canelo Alvarez. Yet guys like him give Canelo Alvarez no credit at all. Consistently making videos shitting on Canelo Alvarez and discrediting everything he does. Until, of course, they need to use Canelo Alvarez to talk about his great resume to somehow dismiss and downplay Inoue. Right? He talked about Bud Crawford having a way better resume. Yet, when Bud Crawford beat Julius Ndongo, did he have a better resume than Inoue has now? Of course he didn't. His resume was nothing special up until that point. He talks about that he beat somebody significant in every single weight division he beat to do these things. Who did he beat? Burns, the Scottish fighter, who nobody really ranks as a great lightweight. Gamboa at 140, or Postal, or Julius Ndongo, who went on to lose every single fight since getting knocked out by Bud Crawford. He just fought the most significant fight of his career against Errol Spence. Like, this is not me hating on Crawford. This is literally what Errol Spence fans for the last 5 years were doing. John ignores that, right? And now tries to dismiss it and act like somehow Bud Crawford's resume is earth-shattering by beating old-ass shot fighters like Khan and Kell Brook and Sean Porter. Somehow that makes you have a great resume because you fought old shot fighters with name recognition. And I'm not trying to dismiss or downplay Bud Crawford, but it's funny how people pick and choose when they want to fanboy for a fighter and his resume. Because literally for 5 years, uh, the LDBC, the majority of Black American YouTubers, have went on a vendetta criticizing and shitting all over Bud Crawford's resume. But now you're going to come out and somehow act like his resume is fucking great. Literally, people have just been criticizing him because he's facing a guy with only 10 or 11 professional fights in a world title fight. I didn't do that because I'm not fucking ignorant like they are. I've actually praised Crawford, saying he fights this guy, he equals what Inoue's done by becoming a four-weight world champion. He equals what Canelo Alvarez has done by becoming a four-weight world champion, right? That's significant. He equals what Navarrete is trying to do, become a four-weight world champion, right? These things are significant. When we talk about guys like Sugar Ray Robinson, what made what he did was significant was the competition he fought, but not just that, because he fought a lot of bums during that whole fucking 200 and something fight resume as well. And then fought a lot of the same guys again and again and again, because boxing wasn't as diverse and as global as it is now. So you had a far smaller pool of fighters to fight. So generally you fought those guys 5, 6, 7, 8 times, right? Which you can go look at his resume and see that. So if your style was better, then inevitably you're probably going to win the majority of those fights. But what made him great was the fact that he went through multiple weight divisions, taking on the best competition in those weight divisions, which is exactly what Inoue has done. The only one division you could probably, well, 2 divisions, if you want to be fair, you could probably be critical of him that he didn't fight at 112, didn't try to fight Roman Gonzalez. And then again at 115, he didn't take on any of the top 5 fighters there, like Roman Gonzalez, Estrada, Rungvisai, or Quadras, or even the Filipino fighter, and Canjas, right? And I know people say he tried to get those fights, he tried to get those fights, he tried to get those fights. Okay, that's why I don't hate on it. I just pointed out that his resume would be so much better, so much more elite if he would have at least fought one of those top fighters at 115 pounds, which is why now I hope he stays at 122 so he can go on and fight MJ Akhmedov. And then he can fight Junto Nakatani. The funny thing is, he's using people like Juan Francisco Estrada's resume to dismiss and discredit Inoue. Yet if I used Juan Francisco Estrada's resume to discredit Errol Spence, he would lose his fucking shit. Yet that's not a competition. Juan Francisco Estrada's resume is better than Errol Spence. Errol Spence got tons of attention for fighting in-house PBC fighters and ducking Bud Crawford for 5 years. And then finally, when he did fight Bud Crawford, he got his ass beat, which is why he's not on my pound for pound list, right? This pound for pound list I'm showing you is similar to Ring Magazine, but I made, of course, some adjustments. People like John may not like it, but that's fine. This is my preference. My preference. It doesn't have to relate to what you want. You can make your pound for pound list and make your preference. The difference is I can justify my preference based on actual things that people all can follow and all can quantify, which justify my rankings. You can't. You will just use hate, opinion, and negativity, right? Like I just listened. He said Charlo's resume is better than Inoue. Charlo. You tell me the one great fighter Charlo fought at 154. Tony Harrison? Not great. The best guy he fought in his whole career was Austin Trout. Yet Canelo Alvarez got very little to no credit for beating Austin Trout. For unification, when Austin Trout was unbeaten and just coming off of a Miguel Cotto victory. That's the Canelo Alvarez Trout, right? Not the Trout that Charlo fought, who had already lost several times, was older and didn't hold a world title. Got destroyed by Erislandy Lara. But his resume is better than Inoue. Like, it's ridiculous the extent people go to try to dismiss and downplay. Like, he always talks about Roman Gonzalez and he pulls out the one fight that Roman Gonzalez had against a guy whose resume was terrible when he went back to Nicaragua to defend his titles in front of his home crowd. So they picked a cherry pick opponent so he could showcase himself in front of his home crowd, as if somehow that's the worst thing that ever happened in boxing. Yet when I show Pernell Whitaker, who is a pound for pound fighter and someone he would say is better than every single fighter I just mentioned that's not black. Pernell Whitaker did that 3 times, coming off of big fights, whether it was a loss or a draw or a close decision, came and fought guys with losing records, terrible fucking records. Did it 3 times. But the difference was boxing fans back then weren't as ignorant, stupid, and racist and narrative driven as John is. That's clearly the difference. Clearly. But I'm going to go through my list. And of course, a guy like John is going to get bent out of shape because the truth is he will put non-black fighters on his pound for pound list. But it's not that he believes these guys are on his pound for pound list. It's not that he really supports them and believes that they do deserve to be on the list. He's only doing that so that he could push a narrative. He'd be more than happy to support an all-black champ side pound for pound list and defend it to the death, as he's done many times before, and said, what? It's his opinion. Everybody can have an opinion on a pound for pound list. Yeah, everybody that's black. But everybody that's not black can't. Ring Magazine literally is not one individual making a pound for pound list. I think it's 18 or 21 media members, all writers for different periodicals, all involved with boxing. And they put their pound for pound list out. And based on positioning, they get a number. And then all these fighters' numbers are put together. And the fighter with the highest number becomes pound for pound number 1. And then so on and so forth until you end up getting the top 10. So there's no bias at all. Because if one individual makes his pound for pound list and is super biased, the other people, their numbers are going to end up pushing some of his more ridiculous biased opinions right out of the top 10. So one person cannot adjust or negatively affect Ring Magazine's pound for pound list. But people like this, they don't really think about what they're talking about, right? If you wanted to criticize my list when it's just me, or you want to criticize Ring IQ or people like Champside, where it's one individual making a list, you could do that, because obviously you could say this person is biased. You know, they're picking people just because of race, whatever narrative you might be. We see what Champside and these guys all from the LDBC do, because they didn't want to give accomplishments any value, because all the people that were creating a lot of accomplishments outside of Bud Crawford generally were non-black American fighters. So they threw away accomplishments and started talking about the eye test, and everything became about the eye test. My pound for pound list is based on the eye test, thinking that this guy would beat this guy if they were the same size. Now, what's more opinion based than that? Because literally there's no facts involved at all. Nobody else can use your list and the way you justified it to quantify a similar result. Whereas if you use legitimate accomplishments, resume, world titles won, world titles defended, world champions fought, weight divisions beat, won, divisions won, undisputed unification titles won. These are all things that everybody can look at and see the common sense with it and use that as a way to justify and base their pound for pound list. That's why when I make my list, often fighters that I really like aren't on my pound for pound list, because they're coming off of a loss, they don't hold a world title, whatever the situation may be, right? The only reason Canelo, coming off of a loss to Bivol, still stayed on the pound for pound list was because he was still undisputed at 168 pounds, right? And you could say that's more the politics of boxing that allowed that situation to happen. That's probably true, right? But historically, it was not unusual for a fighter to have a world title at one weight, go up and challenge himself at another weight, not win it, and then just come back down and keep his title at his other weight class. It's been pretty normal in history. So we're not going to hold that against a fighter because that would be downright ridiculous and something that, we've seen before. But let's get to this pound for pound list and break it down. As I said, this list I've already made. I was going to make this video anyways. Pound for pound, the best list, no lies, no bullshit. So the irony is, when I made this picture, it was quite a while ago, before Shakur looked bad in a previous fight and, other situations. So, don't let this necessarily bias you to my pound for pound list. Some people may feel some guys are on the list prematurely. They may have other fighters they think deserve to be on this list. That's fine. That's your opinion. That's your preference. Make your list, justify it by using things that everyone can quantify. And then I will agree with you. But this is my list, so let's go through it and break it down. Obviously, I used images from Ring Magazine, so a lot of what they had, I agreed with. So it made it pretty easy for me to make this PPT or this presentation. So let's go through. So number one, and as I said, if you have Crawford number one, or even Usyk number one after this weekend, if he beats Fury, and Inoue number one, I don't think you're wrong. I think you could justify any of those three fighters as your pound for pound fighter. And I don't think anyone should really be hating on you for that. We know the only reason John is hating on Inoue being number one is because he wants only a black fighter to be recognized as number one, Bud Crawford. Bud Crawford has a fight later on this year to become a four-weight world champion. At that point, he could very well eclipse Inoue. Just like when Inoue beat Stephen Fulton, I felt he deserved to be pound for pound number one. But I also knew that Crawford had a fight with Errol Spence coming up. And if he beat Spence, especially in a devastating fashion like Inoue did Fulton, he would eclipse Inoue, which is exactly what happened. Now Inoue's come back, won multiple fights, equaled Bud Crawford in becoming a two-weight undisputed champion, and now just defended it, something Bud Crawford has never done. He was undisputed at 140, undisputed at 147, never defended any one of those two undisputed crowns. Inoue just did it against Luis Neri in front of 55,000 people. Got dropped, came back, and did what champions do. Made adjustments and destroyed Neri. I, during my live, sort of compared it to Floyd Mayweather when he fought Shane Mosley. Of course, Floyd didn't get dropped, but he got hit by two mammoth fucking right hands by Shane Mosley, which really, at that moment, people thought, whoa, Shane Mosley really has a chance of potentially pulling the upset against Floyd Mayweather. But then coming out the next round, Floyd Mayweather made the adjustment, and Shane Mosley was never a threat or never dangerous again. And that's exactly what Inoue did, right? He got dropped in the first round, came back, knocked Neri down in the second round. And then from there, took over and ended up destroying Neri in a fantastic performance. And Usyk, obviously, we know is going to be fighting Tyson Fury this weekend. If he wins, he's going to become a two-weight undisputed champion, equaling both Inoue and Crawford. All three of them are undefeated, unbeaten, right? Neri, obviously, has an incredible knockout ratio. When you look at his 22 world title fights, he has 20 knockouts in those 22 fights. 20 knockouts in his 22 world title fights. It's a 90-something% knockout ratio in world title fights. And literally people praised Deontay Wilder for having equal type of record. They ignored when Golovkin had an equal record at middleweight. But this is the thing. People pick and choose these kind of stats when it can be supported on a fighter they want. But when it's a fighter they don't want, they basically ignore it at all and say, who is he fighting? He fought 12 world champions. The same amount of world champions as Lomachenko and the same amount of world champions that Bud Crawford is going to have when he fights in his next fight. He too will have 12 world champions on his resume, like Lomachenko and like Inoue. That matters. People talk about how his resume is way better. Yet you've fought less world champions than Inoue. So how great is your resume? Right? Like, how much better can it be? It's not like you're Floyd Mayweather, who fought, I don't know how many world champions he faced. I think he had 28 world title fights. But as far as how many world champions in that time, somebody that knows Floyd's resume better can leave it in the comment section below. But the way Inoue is moving, I think he is 6 fights away from duplicating Floyd Mayweather's 28 fight world title fight streak. Do you think he'll get credit for that? Of course he won't. Of course he won't. Because guys like John, they use that as a way to fanboy and hype up Floyd Mayweather, will dismiss it and downplay it with regards to Inoue. But so here's my number 1 and number 2. But as I said, Terence Crawford has a fight coming up soon in California to become a 4-weight world champion against an undefeated champion to get his 12th world champion on his resume. At that point, he will move to number 1 on my pound for pound list. But he may have to pass Usyk, who is fighting this weekend and will become number 1 on my pound for pound list if he beats Tyson Fury. I don't think this is based on race. I don't think it's based on hate. I don't think it's based on anything except literally what the boxers are doing in the ring. And this is what I've always said, going back to when Floyd Mayweather retired and there was no dominant fighter in the number 1 position. Fighters are going to move through this position based on what they're doing in the ring, right? I had Canelo pound for pound number 1, but then he lost to Bivol, so he fell out of that position. That's what happens. That was based on a loss, but it was also based on other people's performances, not losing and winning, like Inoue, like Usyk, like Crawford, who went on to get significant wins on their resumes and obviously elevated past him. And let's move to slide number 2. So at number 3 and number 4, see, it's hard to somehow try to act like these 4 fighters that I mentioned don't deserve to be in the top 5 on a pound for pound list. Let's go through it. So Inoue is a 4-weight world champion, undisputed in 2 weight divisions. Nobody in history has done that before. Nobody. Bud Crawford is a 3-weight world champion, undisputed in 2 weight divisions. Has a fight coming up where he could equal Inoue and become a 4-weight world champion as well. Joining Inoue in a category where that's something nobody in the history of boxing has ever done before. Usyk, 21-0, obviously an undisputed cruiserweight, a 3-belt unified heavyweight who's going to be fighting Tyson this weekend, can become the 3rd fighter in boxing history to become a 2-weight undisputed champion. I mean, these are the kind of things people should be excited about, right? Not trying to use to push racial narratives on YouTube. Because never in boxing history have we had this happen before. And now we're on the cusp of having 3 fighters do it, which you got to fucking be happy about. This has to show you that boxers are literally trying to do great things in the sport. Not based on color, not based on fucking ethnicity, because here you have an Asian, a Black American, and a white European. So literally you have the gambit fucking covered on, races. Then, of course, here at number 4, you have a guy who is in the conversation as the best Mexican fighter of all time. Whether you agree with that or not, I know I saw people talk about Julio Cesar Chavez, but I was around when Chavez was pound for pound and fighting De La Hoya and Camacho and Pernell Whitaker and others. And people were just as critical to Julio Cesar Chavez then, specifically based on the fact that he wasn't a Black American, right? So this conversation is nothing new. Even going back then, we had the same conversation going on. Pernell Whitaker fans and others were bent out of shape that this Mexican fighter who's one-dimensional and not obviously as skilled was somehow recognized as pound for pound number 1. I didn't like him. I was a Pernell Whitaker fan. I know Pernell beat him. But this is boxing. Sometimes decisions go against your fighters. Lomachenko Haney, Golovkin Canelo, Ward Kovalev, Pernell Julio Cesar Chavez. I also thought Pernell beat De La Hoya, but people continue to tell me that I'm just being a fanboy and that didn't happen. So that's true. I haven't maybe seen that fight recently enough to be fair on it. Obviously, I was much younger when I watched the fight and a little bit too much of a fan of Pernell Whitaker. But the reality of the situation is nothing's different. It's the same now as it was then. Julio Cesar Chavez wasn't seen as the best Mexican fighter of all time. Since then, he's gotten more glory based on the great memories people have for him. But Canelo Alvarez is a four-weight world champion, Mexican. I don't know if there's any Mexican fighters who've been four-weight world champions. Are there? Maybe. I know Navarrete is trying to do that. Maybe Pereira, Morales, Juan Manuel Marquez. Marquez maybe did it. 4, right? So that's obviously significant. But there's no Mexican fighter who's ever been undisputed in the modern era. So now here you have one Mexican, one white European, one Asian, and one Black American. I mean, for me, I think that's fucking excellent. Because I think this is the epitome of not racism, the epitome of not pushing racial narratives, the epitome of, being a real boxing fan. Because isn't it great that you have somebody representing all of these groups that's right there at the pinnacle of the sport, right? It just shows you the diversity. And I mean, yes, I know we live in the woke, diverse world right now. So diversification, right? That's what everyone's pushing. But this is the epitome of that. So when people talk about racism in boxing now, I think really if you look at boxing, the last thing you can really complain about is racism, because boxing has never been as diverse as it is now. 10 Japanese world champions, 12 Mexican world champions, 9 or 10 Black American world champions, and then a mix of other fighters. Currently, I think one African fighter and a few other Asian fighters. And the way it pops up, I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but it's very diverse, and that's excellent. It's a great thing for boxing because obviously being diverse, you're going to attract a far larger audience, right? As opposed to being very specific. But let's go through to the top, the next people. So at number 5, 6, what happened? How did this drop off? Where did Better Biev go? Did I miss him? Well, Better Biev is my number 5. I don't know where he fell off, but let's just talk about him. So Better Biev, who currently is a 3-belt unified champion, only in one weight division, but that's literally exactly the same as Errol Spence. People at Errol Spence, pound for pound number 1 and pound for pound number 2, based on being a one-weight world champion that was 3-belt unified. So if you felt that Errol Spence could be considered a top 5 pound for pound fighter, you should have no problem with Better Biev being number 5 on this list. 100% KO ratio. Obviously was scheduled to fight Bivol, my number 6 ranked fighter, for undisputed at 175 pounds. But very disappointed that fight fell through because of an injury to Better Biev. It's very disappointing. That was the fight I was most excited about in 2024. And now that fight may very well never happen because Better Biev is 39 years old and God knows how long he can continue to do what he's doing, specifically with injuries and everything else. But he is currently my number 5 fighter on my list. At number 6, Dimitri Bivol, 22-0. Obviously, a guy who beat Canelo Alvarez, beat Zurdo Ramirez, right? Beat Joe Smith. Very quality wins on his resume and was scheduled to face Better Biev. And a lot of people really favored him to beat Better Biev. And I mean, to be fair, you kind of have to give him some advantage. He's much younger, more prime, far better legs, far better speed. And based on these things, people feel he would outbox Better Biev in the same fashion he outboxed Canelo Alvarez. But the difference is Canelo Alvarez and Beterbiev. There's a definite weight discrepancy between these two fighters. Beterbiev is a legitimate 175-pound fighter. Canelo Alvarez was never a legitimate 175-pound fighter and is more of a middleweight than he is a 168-pound fighter, right? So the fact that Sugar Ray Robinson, the best fighter in history of boxing, according to many, moved up and fought Joey Maxim at light heavyweight, right? Ended up getting knocked out by Joey Maxim. Didn't disrespect or take away from Sugar Ray Robinson's career or his legacy for creating the pound for pound list and being the best fighter of all time, even though he got knocked out when he moved up to his third weight division. And that was back in the day where there was legitimate weight divisions, no in-between weight divisions. So you got to keep that in mind. When you look at a Canelo Alvarez, he's been through 3 legitimate weight divisions, but he's only won 2, middleweight and light heavyweight, right? He didn't win welterweight because he never fought for a world title at welterweight. Even though if he would have beat Floyd Mayweather, I think that would have justified him as a legitimate old school 3-weight world champion. Obviously, Manny Pacquiao did 3 legitimate weight divisions. Inoue could have, but obviously skipped over 112. And because of that, obviously he's going to, have to go to 126 to sort of accomplish that feat. But we'll see if he does it. To become one of only 5 or 6 5-weight world champions of all time, that's legacy. But of course, guys like John don't want to give him credit, right? Pacquiao, Floyd, De La Hoya, Hearns, Leonard, Inoue. I mean, you're talking about quite the pantheon of legendary boxers to become 5-weight world champions, right? It's not something that's normal, but we know that when Inoue does that, people like John and others are going to find ways to discredit him, even though a guy like Leonard did it by fighting Donnie Lalonde, a one-handed puncher from Canada, who he fought for 2 world titles, 168 and 175, at a catchweight. Can you imagine if Inoue, Lomachenko, Canelo Alvarez did anything like that? Can you imagine the scrutiny and the criticism that they would get? And to be fair, Leonard did get quite a bit of scrutiny and criticism back in the day. Not for me, because I was a huge Leonard fan, but a lot of the hardcore boxing fans were very critical of that move. So let's move forward. Then we have Lomachenko at number 7. And I know this is going to really bend some people out of shape. It is what it is. Lomachenko is a 3-weight world champion who is 3-belt unified at lightweight. Just came and won the 4th belt in that division. So now has held all 4 belts at that division. Most people feel he deserved to beat Devin Haney. He didn't get the win, but nonetheless, it was that close of a fight, that competitive, that if you had Devin Haney ranked number 2 on your pound-for-pound list, then you can't really be too upset with Lomachenko being number 7, right? Obviously, he wasn't number 7 coming off of that loss, but he's since bounced back and become a world champion once again. And now we'll see what he does moving forward. But yes, Lomachenko at number 7. Then we move to number 8. I got Gervonta Tank Davis. Gervonta Tank Davis is one of the most exciting fighters in boxing. Obviously, he's a crowd favorite. The biggest problem with him is that he hasn't really chased legacy in his career, right? I know all the people mentioned in front of him have come under a lot of scrutiny for this and that and other things. Well, people defend Tank Davis, a guy who's legitimately a 2-weight world champion now, after being emailed the WBA super title recently. He didn't win that title. Devin Haney vacated it, and he was emailed that title by the WBA. People want to be critical of Lomachenko for fighting for a vacant IBF title. Well, Tank Davis didn't even fight for a vacant WBA title. He was just elevated to that position. Kind of like Boots Ennis, who was elevated to the IBF title without fighting anyone from the IBF, whereas Lomachenko literally fought somebody to get that title. Shakur Stevenson as well fought for a vacant title. Navarrete is going to be fighting for a vacant title, right? Fighting for vacant titles is something that naturally happens when the champion that was undisputed moves out of the division, because now all 4 titles become vacant. So you can expect probably 4 world champions to follow, which obviously happened at bantamweight, where you currently have 4 Japanese world champions. And obviously just is happening right now at 135, where you have 2 Black Americans, 1 Ukrainian, and soon 1 Mexican. But yeah, Gervonta Tank Davis, I do think he is one of the best fighters in boxing. I would give him a good chance of beating Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, Vasily Lomachenko, Shakur Stevenson. I don't know who would really win those matchups, but I definitely think those are all 50-50 fights, and you have to give Tank a bit of an edge in most of those fights because of his natural power and explosiveness. He's dangerous more so than any of those fighters, because none of those fighters really have what he has. But you got to fight those fights. We can't give you praise unless you actually do it in the ring. He doesn't get credit for Ryan Garcia beating Devin Haney, right? He doesn't get credit for Devin Haney beating Vasily Lomachenko. He doesn't get credit for other people's victories. He's got to literally do it himself. That's why he is number 8 on my list, even though when you think about the people in front of him, he could be easily in front of probably 3 of those fighters, right? Probably easy in front of 3. Beterbiev, Bivol, probably Lomachenko, maybe even Canelo Alvarez. Because Canelo at this point obviously isn't quite the Canelo Alvarez he was earlier on. But as far as Usyk, Inoue, and Crawford, at this point, I don't think you could even really think about putting Tank Davis based on the eye test above those guys. Not unless he actually does something significant in the ring. People are going to call this hate, but I mean, how am I hating? Everything I'm saying is fair across the board. I'm expecting him to do what the people above him have already done. Move through multiple weight divisions. Unify titles. Everyone I've mentioned outside of Bivol has unified titles. Bivol fought an undisputed champion, but obviously he didn't get credit for those titles. Was scheduled to fight Beterbiev, but obviously that fight fell through. Gervonta Tank Davis has never been scheduled to fight a unification fight, not at 130, 135, or 140. And obviously, that's a criticism that we have to put on him. Then we get to number 9, Jesse Bam Rodriguez, 19-0. He's grown on me the more I've watched him again and again. Obviously, when he beat Rungvisai and Quadras, those were very significant wins for a very young fighter. But we had already seen Estrada do basically the same thing he'd done to them before he did it. So it wasn't like he was breaking new ground. But when he went down in weight class, fought Sonny Edwards in a unification fight, and put on a masterclass performance, beating a very difficult outboxer in Sonny Edwards to become a unified champion. That obviously gave him a lot of praise as far as I'm concerned. And now he's moving back up in weight and challenging a guy who easily could be on this pound for pound list, but because of inactivity isn't. Juan Francisco Estrada. Obviously his victory over Roman Gonzalez is one of the best victories out of everybody on this pound for pound list, right? Let's be honest. Who has a better victory on their resume than Estrada beating Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez and doing it in a very convincing fashion? Nobody. So if Jesse Bam Rodriguez can go in there and get a definitive victory over Estrada, it would definitely elevate him probably ahead of Tank Davis, probably ahead of Lomachenko, and very well above Bivol as well, because Bivol at this point is going to be fighting probably mediocre opponents until maybe he can get that better BF fight. So he's not going to be elevating himself on that pound for pound list. Unfortunately, you can't blame him. It is what it is. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I'm a teacher, screaming all day and then doing YouTube. So sometimes this happens. It's my singing voice. But let's move through. Okay. So then we get to number 10. And this could be controversial. Some people maybe will feel Shakur Stevenson deserves to be on this position over Junto Nakatani. Some people may feel that Devin Haney, coming off of a loss, even though there's obviously potential situation that may take that loss away from his resume, deserves to be still on this list. But until those things are worked out, you lost. So you're not on the pound for pound list. But people who are going to hate on Junto Nakatani, it's because, again, ignorance. They're going to say that, well, Shakur Stevenson is a three-way world champion. Okay. Junto Nakatani is a three-way world champion. Shakur Stevenson's resume is better than Junto Nakatani. Is it better? Has he fought more world champions than Junto Nakatani, who's younger and right now is in position to unify and potentially become undisputed at 118 pounds? I mean, Shakur also is in position to potentially try to become undisputed at 135. But which position do you think is more likely? Nakatani in a division where 4 Japanese world champions hold titles, and there's not so much political back and forth, or Shakur, who might be leaving Top Rank to sign with DAZN, separating one belt to DAZN, one belt to PBC, 2 belts to Top Rank, really creating more of this political bullshit that could only eventually potentially stop that from happening. Potentially. But let's look at the reality of the situation. So that's what we're going to look at. Oh, my voice. It's terrible. I don't know why this is happening now. La 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 la. So Shakur Stevenson. Let's check him out. 21-0, 10 knockouts, 26 years of age. He's faced Alberto Guevara. Was he ever a champion? He might have been. He got beat by Shinzuki Yamanaka. Got beat by Leo Santa Cruz. So I don't know if he was ever a world champion, but he's obviously been in world title fights. So let's move through. Jamal Herring, Oscar Valdez. So at this point in Shakur Stevenson's career, he's beat 2 world champions. He won a vacant title at 126 by beating Joet Gonzalez. He beat a world champion in Jamal Herring, unified against Oscar Valdez, and now won a vacant title against Edwin De Los Santos. So he's fought 2 world champions in 21 fights. 2. And is a 3-weight world champion. But yet Top Rank is racist and they don't care about black fighters. Yet you're a 3-weight world champion, thanks to Top Rank, giving you 2 vacant titles. But, okay. So let's look at Junto Nakatani. Nakatani, 27-0, 20 KOs, 26 years old. So literally the same age as Shakur Stevenson. 6 more fights, 10 more knockouts, and both of them are 3-weight world champions. He's faced Milan Malindu, world champion. Angel Acosta, world champion. Francisco Rodriguez, world champion. Andrew Maloney, world champion. And Alexandro Santiago, world champion. So 5 world champions he's faced in his career. Oh, wait. Plus, he fought Sego Yoon Akyu, beat him back in 2017. He's a world champion currently. He also faced Masamichi Yabuki, who actually beat Kenshiro. So that's 7 world champions. 7. And I'm curious about this one other guy, Gilmel Magramo. I wonder if he was a world champion, the Filipino fighter. Uh, I don't know if he was a world champion before. Was that the first fight for a world title? WBO title vacant. Okay, so he wasn't the world champion. He just fought for the vacant title against Nakatani. So Nakatani has faced 7 world champions, Shakur Stevenson 2, right? These are significant. Right now, he's also in a division where potentially his next fight is going to be a unification fight against his 8th world champion. And hopefully, sometime soon, we can see him eventually fight a pound-for-pound quality fighter, like we hope to see Shakur fight Tank Davis or Vasily Lomachenko, a pound-for-pound quality fighter. But at this point, Shakur is coming off of a very piss-poor performance in his last fight. He's facing a nobody in his next fight. So, based on this level of competition, it's hard to put him above Junto Nakatani. But people are going to, of course, criticize this, but everything I just told you is fact. 7 world champions to 2, both 3-weight world champions, right? These kind of things, anybody, casual fans could take these stats, not have any bias, not know any of these fighters, not watch any of them fight, look at these stats, and they could pretty much put this pound for pound list together very similar to what I'm doing right now. There may be some differences, but most of these same fighters would probably be on this pound for pound list. So let's move through to some guys that are on the cusp and could justifiably be on this list as well, and maybe deserve to be on this list. Obviously, Shakur is number 11. At number 12, we have Kenshiro Teraji. Kenshiro Teraji is obviously a unified 108-pound champion. Fought far more than 2 world champions. Did take a loss to Yabuki, but ended up beating Yabuki in the rematch. Went on to unify titles and was scheduled to have a 3-belt unification fight last year, but that fell through. So hopefully he'll be able to get unification, and hopefully he'll be able to do undisputed this year. We'll see how that works out. And if not, I would like to see him move up to the next division and try to become a 2-weight world champion. But let me know what you think about Kenshiro. He's a very good fighter, technically very, very good. And how many champions has he faced? I think it's like 7 or 8 as well. Then we get a guy who easily could be higher on this list, but I was kind of disappointed in a few of his last performances, which is why he's this low on the list, currently at number 13. And that is Kazuka Ioka. Ioka is a 4-weight world champion. 4-weight. His next fight is against Fernando Martinez for unification at 115 pounds. If he beats Martinez, he's definitely going to jump into the top 10 on my pound for pound list, above probably Junta Nakatani, and maybe even above Gervonta Tank Davis. And I think it would be justified. 4-weight world champion, unified champion. He fought easily, I think, what was it? 11 or 12 world champions up until this point of his career. And a few that are on the cusp of being Hall of Famers, right? So we will see what he does. Obviously, Fernando Martinez is a very, very tough fighter. He's a nonstop energizer bunny who just outworks you and throws crazy shots, kind of like Bam Rodriguez's brother, who Shunta Nakatani, Ioka was scheduled to fight, fought him, and controversially had a very close first fight, came back in the second fight and made adjustments and beat Bam's brother convincingly, sending him into retirement. So, a great fight would potentially be Bam Rodriguez against Ioka for 3-belt unification, which if Ioka gets by Martinez and Bam gets by Estrada is probably a guaranteed thing to happen. Guaranteed. Just because the fact that he beat his brother and sent him into retirement. So you could see there's a lot of money on the table. It makes a lot of sense. It'd be a great fight, just that rivalry type of situation, which is kind of why I want to see Junto Nakatani unify against Inoue's brother, knock him out, and then move up to 122 to try to become a four-way world champion by beating the monster. Cross my fingers. Like, you think about the things I'm saying, and it just justifies why these fighters are so high on the pound for pound list, because they're doing things other fighters in boxing aren't do. Tank Davis, who's above them on my list, he ain't doing none of this. None of it, right? If he was, he would be fucking top 5 pound for pound. Then we say, who would you put on your list and where? Obviously, as we said, pound for pound lists are subjective and based on preference. But you can see that everyone I have on my list fought multiple weight divisions, unified titles, fought a lot of world champions, won a lot of titles, defended those titles, right? And they've done what they should have done. You may question the division they fight in. You may question the opponents they beat. But if you're in a smaller division and you don't know the guys they're fighting, but they fought 12 world champions in their career, what else do you want them to do? They're doing literally what they should be doing. Tank Davis, in comparison, I mean, we just told you Shakur Stevenson fought 2 world champions. Devin Haney fought Lomachenko, Kambosos, Prograis, Petraza, Santa Cruz, Gamboa. Who am I talking about? Tank Davis, right? Cuellar, and maybe one other. So Tank Davis has fought 7 to 8 world champions up until this point of his career. He's almost 30, but he's fought world champions, right? Which is why people do give him some credit and why he is high on the pound for pound list if you think 8 is high. But, I forget who I was talking about right now, but yeah, so let's move through. So obviously, this is currently my list of pound for pound. As I said, anybody could take these stats, put them together, and justify these fighters being ranked so highly. It's not based on race. It's not based on ethnicity. It's not based on what country you come from. It's based on literally what have you done in the ring. How many weight classes have you fought? How many unification fights have you had? How many world titles have you defended? How many world title fights have you had? Who have you fought, right? These things are what we want to see fighters do. All fighters. The problem is some people want to pick and choose. People literally will fanboy Andre Ward's resume, but then they'll criticize Canelo, saying Canelo's fighting a bunch of Euro bums, but then they'll praise Andre Ward for fighting a bunch of Euro bums, right? How does that make sense? Because people aren't consistent. They're trying to fanboy the fighters they like, put them into these positions, and justify it any way possible. That's why, of course, John Boxing released this stupid video today where basically he's just hating on Ring Magazine's pound for pound list. And probably the worst thing you can say about this list is the fact that Errol Spence is still on the list, coming off of a fucking brutal knockout loss, because no one else on this list is coming off of a loss. Only him. Everyone else on this list is coming off of significant victories, which is why they're on the pound for pound list. Devin Haney's not on the list because he's coming off of a significant loss, but somehow Errol Spence still is on the list, inactive and getting knocked out, right? But, people are going to somehow act like, this list is unfair. Like, you think about who these guys are facing. So Inoue just became undisputed. Crawford just became undisputed and now is trying to become a 4-way champion. Usyk is fighting to become undisputed. Alvarez has defended his undisputed title, right? Something that's not that usual. Him and Inoue have done it. Not many other fighters have. Beterbiev was scheduled to fight for undisputed. Bivol was scheduled to fight for undisputed. Spence got knocked out fighting for undisputed. Knocked out. Davis ain't really doing much. Bam Rodriguez is fighting a pound-for-pound quality fighter in Juan Francisco Estrada. Junta Nakatani just became a 3-weight world champion, right? Some people are actually doing things, great things, and other people aren't, right? But leave your comments below. Let me know what you think of this pound-for-pound list. And do you think it's so disrespectful to contemplate, to think about having Inoue, a guy who's fought 12 world champions, is a 4-weight world champion, is 2-weight undisputed, has fought 22 world title fights, knocked out 20 of the opponents he faced in those 22 fights, for a 90% KO ratio in world title fights. But it's disrespectful to think about him being so high in a pound-for-pound list. Is that disrespectful? Or is it disrespectful to try to do everything in your power to try to rip him down? And the irony is the guy doing this at one time when he was trying to use Inoue to shit on Roman Gonzalez, talked about how Inoue was his favorite fighter. He was his favorite fighter. How quick the times change. Once Inoue has become super relevant and in the pound-for-pound boxing conversation, that was enough to make John Boxing no longer support him, no longer be a fan of his, and now do what he's done consistently. Find a way to discredit him. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you next time. Peace out. Wish me luck.